Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a tough one. We're looking at the insanity defense in criminal law. But we're not just scratching the surface. We're going deep into a specific case, Parsons v. State from the 19th century. It's fascinating because it tackles this core conflict.
Right, the difference between knowing something is wrong and, well, being completely unable to stop yourself.
Exactly. So the legal problem, when you boil it down, is this. If someone intellectually gets right versus wrong, can they still be legally blameless? If some mental disease just destroys their ability to choose, how does the law handle that idea of destroyed free will?
Yeah, and to really tackle this, we need a structured approach, a rigorous legal analysis. We'll start with the basics, the two things needed for legal responsibility. Then, critically, why the court felt it had to move beyond the old rules, the policy reasons. And finally, we'll break down the Parsons test itself, element by element. Really model how you'd analyze this precisely.
Okay, let's start right there, at the foundation. If we want a just rule for criminal responsibility, what are the absolute must-have elements, the two core components?
Well, the court laid it out quite clearly. Any just rule has to recognize two key things. First, what they called capacity of intellectual discrimination.
So basically knowing right from wrong.
Precisely. Knowing good from evil, as applied to the act. But second, and this is the big one the old rules often missed, is freedom of will.
The power to choose.
Yes, the power of volition, the ability to actually control your actions and choose the right path, assuming you know what it is.
So the older tests just focused on the knowing part, element one, and kind of ignored the control part, element two. That seems like a huge gap. What's the underlying policy thinking there? Because if you can't control it...
It means the act was unavoidable, right? And that's the core policy, drawn from thinkers like Wharton and Bishop. They argued there's no justice in punishing someone for something they literally could not avoid doing because a disease took away their power to choose. The whole idea of law assumes you can choose to obey if disease removes that ability.
Then the basis for punishment disappears. Okay.
Yeah.
But adding that freedom of will part, the volitional test, that faced a lot of resistance, didn't it? Why was that? And why did Parsons finally say, okay, precedent or not, we have to change this?
Yeah, major resistance. Partly practical, partly philosophical. People worried it was too easy to fake an irresistible impulse.
Yeah.
How could a jury possibly tell the difference between genuine compulsion from a disease and just, well, a really bad temper? Wickedness, as they might say.
Right. The line seems blurry.
But the Parsons Court basically said the common law has to evolve. It can't ignore science. Advances in understanding the mind show that, yes, diseases could destroy self-control even if the person still knew right from wrong.
They called it juridical evolution. I remember reading that. Like the law had to adapt or become irrelevant.
Exactly. They saw it as essential for the law's survival, striving for the highest practical wisdom. They explicitly rejected the idea that legal rules were set in stone, like the law of Medes and Persians, especially when science showed the old way was just incomplete.
But they knew it was tricky.
Oh, absolutely. They acknowledged the dilemma, citing Lord Hale. You have to avoid being inhumane to people with real mental defects, but you also can't be too indulgent towards serious crimes.
It's a balancing act, finding that line.
A very tough line-drawing exercise,
Yeah.
between compassion and control.
Okay, that really sets the stage. Let's transition now and apply this framework. We're moving into our structured analysis of Parsons v. State. First, following our method, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, facts. The defendants were a mother and her daughter. They were convicted of murdering Bennett Parsons. The defense argued insanity. Evidence suggested the daughter was legally termed an idiot at the time, and the mother was a lunatic suffering from severe insane delusions. And crucially, the defense argued her act shooting Parsons was the direct result, the offspring and product of those delusions.
Got it. And given those facts, what was the core legal issue the court needed to decide?
The central question was, can the law fairly limit responsibility only to whether someone knows right from wrong? Or does it have to recognize that even if someone knows right from wrong, a mental disease might put them under such duress that their power to actually choose is completely destroyed?
So the court issue is whether knowing is enough, or if control matters too. What rule of law did the court then apply to answer this? Can you state the full rule and break down its specific parts, the inquiries for the jury?
Sure. The court developed a comprehensive three-part rule to cover both knowing and willing. It's structured as a sequence of questions for the jury. First, Inquiry 1, disease. Was the defendant actually afflicted with a mental disease at the time of the crime? Were they idiotic or otherwise insane? Second, Inquiry 2, cognitive test. If yes, did they know right from wrong, specifically regarding the act they committed? If the answer here is no, they're not responsible. End of story there.
Okay.
But third, inquiry 3, volitional test conditional. This is the key addition. If the defendant did know right from wrong, they might still not be responsible if two further conditions are met together. A, the free agency element. Did the disease, through its duress, destroy their power to choose between right and wrong, to avoid the act? Was their free agency gone at that moment?
Total destruction of choice.
Yes. And B, the causation element. Was the crime solely the product of that mental disease? Is there a direct cause and effect link, and nothing else caused it?
That structure forces a really logical step-by-step analysis. Okay, now for the court's elemental analysis, how they applied this rule. Let's walk through it. How did the court apply the first element, mental disease? Inquiry 1.
Well, the court saw this as a threshold question of fact for the jury. Does the evidence show a mental disease existed? In Parsons, you had clear allegations. The mother, a lunatic with delusions, the daughter, an idiot. The court basically said, yes, this evidence is enough to potentially satisfy Inquiry 1. It means the lower court couldn't just ignore the rest of the test. They had to let the jury consider the other parts based on this evidence.
Understood. Now the second element, knowledge of right from wrong. Inquiry 2. This keeps the traditional test in play, right?
Exactly. It confirms the baseline. The court reaffirmed that if the disease is so bad the person simply cannot understand what they're doing or that it's wrong, they lack the basic intellectual capacity for crime. In that case, the analysis stops right there. They're not punishable. Parsons didn't throw this out. It just said it wasn't the only relevant question anymore.
Okay, so the real fight was over Inquiry 3. The volitional part the trial court ignored. Let's break that down. First, subcondition. A, free agency destroyed. This is the controversial irresistible impulse idea. How did the court define this loss of choice rigorously to avoid just excusing core self-control?
That was the big challenge, yeah. They defined it very strictly. It's not about just struggling to resist. The rule says the disease must subvert the freedom of the will, completely destroy the power of volition to adhere to the right, and abstain from the wrong.
So it's not just difficult, it's impossible for them at that moment.
Right. It's about being rendered powerless by the duress of the disease. The pathology has to be so overwhelming that the person literally can neither repress the impulse nor abstain from the act. A total loss of control driven by the illness itself.
Wow, okay, that is a high bar. Total subversion of will. Now, what about the connection between that state and the crime itself? Subcondition B, sole product and causation.
This part is crucial for keeping the defense narrow and addressing those fears of indulgence to great crimes. The rule is strict. The crime has to be so connected with such mental disease in the relation of cause and effect as to have been the product of it solely.
Solely. That's the key word.
Absolutely. It means you can't just have a mental illness and then commit a crime for some unrelated reason like greed or anger and expect the illness to be an excuse. The crime itself must flow directly and exclusively from the disease. It connects the specific act to the specific pathology. No other cause allowed.
Okay, so after applying all those steps, disease, knowledge check, then destroyed free will, and finally sole causation, what was the court's final conclusion in Parsons?
The conclusion was that the trial court made a fundamental error. By only instructing the jury on the old right from wrong test, it completely blocked them from considering the volitional aspect. Because there was evidence suggesting the mother's disease might have destroyed her power to choose, the jury had to be allowed to weigh that. So the conviction was reversed, and the case was sent back for a new trial using the full three-part instruction.
Okay, to really hammer home this idea of destroyed free will, let's use that visceral hypothetical you mentioned. Picture someone with a severe, genuine delusion they believe a huge poisonous snake is wrapped around their child's throat, about to strike. And the only way they think they can save the child is to punch the wall right next to them. Hard, causing damage. They know punching the wall is wrong, destructive property damage. How does Parsons apply here?
All right, let's run it through the inquiries. Inquiry 1, mental disease. Check. That acute, sincere, insane delusion definitely qualifies as a mental disease at the time of the act. Inquiry 2, right from wrong. Check. You stipulated they know punching the wall is legally wrong and destructive. The intellectual understanding is there.
Right, so we move to the conditional test.
Exactly. Inquiry 3, volitional test.
Yeah.
This is where it gets decided. Subcondition A, free agency destroyed. I'd say check. The sheer terror and urgency of the delusion, the perceived life or death threat to the child, acts as overwhelming duress. It likely destroys their ability to rationally choose not to punch the wall. The delusion compels the action.
They feel they have no other choice.
Precisely. Powerless to resist due to the delusion's force. Subcondition B, sole product and causation, also check. Punching the wall is directly caused by, and only by, the specific delusion about the snake. It's not done out of random anger or anything else. It's a direct effect of the pathological cause.
So the conclusion under Parsons.
The person would likely not be held legally responsible. Their act, while intellectually understood as wrong, was driven solely by a disease that destroyed their free agency in that moment.
That hypothetical really clarifies it. Okay, this has been a very detailed breakdown. Let's synthesize. What does this all mean for you, the listener, practically? If you're spotting an insanity defense issue, how do you bundle these rules into a usable checklist?
Okay, here's your exam framework synthesis checklist. Think of it as your step-by-step diagnostic tool when you see potential cognitive and volitional insanity issues. 1. Initial filter. Is there even evidence of a mental disease or defect at the time of the crime? If not, you just do standard criminal analysis, forget insanity.
Step 1, is there a disease?
Right. 2. Cognitive test, inquiry 2. Assuming there is a disease, did the defendant lack the capacity to know right from wrong concerning that specific act?
Yeah.
If yes, you stop. They're not responsible under the traditional standard. Done. 3. Volitional test. Parsons edition, inquiry 3. This only comes up if the answer to step 2 was no, meaning they did know right from wrong. Now, you ask the two Parsons questions. A, was their free agency, their power to choose, completely destroyed by the disease's duress? And D, was the crime the sole direct product of that disease? Cause and effect.
Both have to be yes.
Both A and B must be yes. 4. Conclusion. If the answer to the cognitive test 2 was no, but the answers to both parts of the volitional test 3A and 3B are yes, then the defendant is not legally responsible because their free agency was destroyed.
That provides a clear path through the analysis. We've really dug into how this 19th century court grappled with science to adjust the law. Moving beyond just did they know to could they actually control it, Parsons forced the law to recognize that difference.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. The Parsons court itself admitted how tricky this line is. They worried about avoiding both inhumanity towards the defects of human nature and too great indulgence to great crimes. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Given how hard it is to truly measure someone's internal state, their free will, how do we strike that balance today? Where should the burden of proof fall to ensure we're being both just to individuals struggling with mental illness and responsible for protecting the community? That tension is still very much alive.